The First Battle of Fallujah, also known as Operation Vigilant Resolve, was an operation to root out extremist elements of Fallujah and bring those responsible to justice for the killing of 4 U.S. contractors in April 2004. The chief catalyst for the operation was the highly publicized killing and mutilation of 4 Blackwater USA private military contractors, and the killings of 5 American soldiers in Habbaniyah a few days earlier. The battle polarized public opinion within Iraq. Background: Fallujah had generally benefited economically under Saddam Hussein, and many residents were employed as employees, military and intelligence officers by his administration. However, there was little sympathy for him following the collapse of his government, which many residents considered oppressive. The city was one of the most religious and culturally traditional areas in Iraq. Following the collapse of the Ba'ath infrastructure in early 2003, local residents had elected a town council led by Habbaniyah Hamd, who kept the city from falling into the control of looters and common criminals. The town council and Hamd were both considered to be nominally pro-American, and their election originally meant that the United States had decided that the city was unlikely to become a hotbed of activity, and didn't require any immediate troop presence. This led to the United States committing few troops to Fallujah from the start. Although Fallujah had seen sporadic airstrikes by American forces, public opposition was not galvanized until 700 members of the 82nd Airborne Division first entered the city on April 23, 2003, and approximately 150 members of Charlie Company occupied Al-Qaeda Primary. On April 28, a crowd of approximately 200 people gathered outside the school past curfew, demanding that the Americans vacate the building and allow it to reopen as a school. The protesters became increasingly heated, and the deployment of smoke gas canisters failed attempt to disperse the crowd. The protest escalated as gunmen reportedly fired upon U.S. forces from the protesting crowd, and U.S. Army soldiers from the 1st Battalion of the 325th Airborne Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Airborne Division returned fire, killing 17 people and wounding more than 70 of the protesters. There were no U.S. Army or coalition casualties in the incident. U.S. forces said that the shooting took place over 30–60 seconds. However, other sources claim the shooting continued for half an hour. 2 days later, a protest at the former Ba'ath Party headquarters decrying the American shootings was also fired upon by U.S. forces, this time the U.S. 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, which resulted in 3 more deaths. Following both incidents, coalition forces asserted that they had not fired upon the protesters until they were fired upon first. The 82nd Airborne soldiers were replaced by soldiers from the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment and 101st Airborne Division 2/502nd BCO Renegades, and on June 4, the Renegades came under attack after a presence patrol. The Renegades were hit with an RPG while mounting vehicles to take them back the base. The attack resulted in 6 injured soldiers and 1 Kia. PFC Brandon Oberleitner was killed on impact as the RPG struck the lead vehicle he was sitting in. His death marked the only loss of life for BCO for the deployment. Soon after this attack, the 3rd Armored Cavalry was forced to request an additional 1,500 troops to help quell the growing resistance faced in Fallujah and nearby Habbaniyah. In June, American forces began confiscating motorcycles from local residents, claiming that they were being used in hit-and-run attacks on coalition forces. On June 30, a large explosion occurred in a mosque in which the imam, Sheikh Laith Khalil, and 8 other people were killed. While the local population claimed that Americans had fired a missile at the mosque, U.S. forces claimed that it was an accidental detonation by insurgents constructing bombs. On February 12, 2004, insurgents attacked a convoy carrying General John Abizade, commander of U.S. forces in the Middle East, and the 82nd Airborne's Major General Charles Swanak, firing on the vehicles from nearby rooftops with RPGs, after seemingly infiltrating the Iraqi security forces. 11 days later, insurgents diverted Iraqi police to a false emergency on the outskirts of the city, before simultaneously attacking 3 police stations, the mayor's office and a civil defense base. At least 17 police officers were killed, and as many as 87 prisoners released. During this time, The 82nd Airborne was conducting regular lightning raids inside the city, where Humvee convoys would destroy road barriers and curbs that could hide IEDs, and oversee searches of homes and schools, which frequently saw property damage, and led to shootouts with local residents. In March 2004, Swanak transferred authority of the Al-Aba province to the I Marine Expeditionary Force commanded by Lieutenant General Conway. By early March 2004, the city began to fall under the increasing influence of guerrilla factions. The rising violence against the American presence resulted in the complete withdrawal of troops from the city, with only occasional incursions trying to gain and reinforce a foothold in the city being attempted. This was coupled with one or two patrols around the outer limits of FOB Volturno, the former site of Qusay and Ardei Hussein's palace. Blackwater deaths. On March 31, 2004, Iraqi insurgents in Fallujah ambushed a convoy containing 4 American private military contractors from Blackwater USA who were conducting delivery for food caterers ESS. The 4 armed contractors, Scott Helvenston, Jerko Zavo, Wesley Batelana and Michael Tiag, were killed by machine gun fire and a grenade thrown through a window of their SUVs. A mob then set their bodies ablaze, and their corpses were dragged through the streets before being hung over a bridge crossing the Euphrates. Photos of the event were released to news agencies worldwide, causing a great deal of indignation and moral outrage in the United States, and prompting the announcement of an upcoming pacification of the city. The intended Marine Corps strategy of foot patrols, less aggressive raids, humanitarian aid, and close cooperation with local leaders was suspended on orders to mount a military operation to clear guerrillas from Fallujah. The campaign. On April 1, Brigadier General Mark Kermite, Deputy Director of U.S. Military Operations in Iraq, promised an overwhelming response to the Blackwater USA deaths, stating "We will pacify that city." On April 3, 2004, the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force received a written command from the Joint Task Force, ordering offensive operations against Fallujah. This order went against the wishes of the Marine commanders on the ground who wanted to conduct surgical strikes and raids against those suspected of involvement in the Blackwater deaths. On the night of April 4, 2004, American forces launched a major assault in an attempt to re-establish security in Fallujah by encircling it with around 2,000 troops. At least 4 homes were hit in aerial strikes, and there was sporadic gunfire throughout the night. By the morning of April 5, 2004, headed by the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, American units had surrounded the city with an aim towards retaking it. American troops blockaded roads leading into the city with Humvees and concertina wire. They also took over a local radio station and handed out leaflets urging residents to remain inside their homes and help American forces identify insurgents and any Fallujahans who were involved in the Blackwater deaths. It was estimated that there were 24 separate hardcore groups of insurgents, armed with RPGs, machine guns, mortars and anti-aircraft weapons, some of it supplied by the Iraqi police. By April 6, 2004, U.S. military sources said that Marines may not attempt to control the center of the town. In the opening days, it was reported that up to a third of the civilian population had fled the city. The siege forced the closing of Fallujah's 2 main hospitals, Fallujah General Hospital and a Jordanian hospital, which were reopened during the ceasefire on April 9, 2004. Also on that date, the port visit to Jebel Ali by the aircraft carrier Sir George Washington, CVN-73, was cancelled, and the George Washington Carrier Strike Group and its embarked carrier Air Wing 7 were ordered to remain on station in the Persian Gulf as fighting intensified between coalition forces and Iraqi insurgents around Fallujah. The resulting engagements set off widespread fighting throughout central Iraq and along the lower Euphrates, with various elements of the Iraqi insurgency taking advantage of the situation and commencing simultaneous operations against the coalition forces. This period marked the emergence of the Mahdi Army, the militia of Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr, as a major armed faction which, at that time, actively participated in anti-coalition operations. The happenings were also punctuated by a surge of a Sunni rebellion in the city of Ramadi. During this period, a number of foreigners were captured by insurgent groups. Some were killed outright, whilst others were held as hostages in an attempt to barter for political or military concessions. Some elements of the Iraqi police and Iraqi Civil Defense Corps also turned on the coalition forces or simply abandoned their posts. The rebels in Fallujah held on as the Americans attempted to tighten their hold on the city. Air bombardments rained on insurgent positions throughout the city. Lockheed AC-130 gunships attacked targets with their Gatling guns and howitzers a number of times. Scout snipers became a core element of the Marine strategy, averaging 31 kills apiece in the battle, while PSYOP Tactical Psychological Operations teams from Tactical Psychological Operations Detachment 910 tried to lure Iraqis out into the open for the scout snipers by reading scripts that were aimed at angering insurgent fighters and by blaring AC/DC along with Metallica and other rock music over their loudspeakers. After 3 days of fighting, it was estimated that the United States had gained control over 25% of the city, although it was suggested that insurgents had lost a number of key defensive positions. Due to the fact that American attacks were taking a toll on civilians as well as Iraqi insurgents, coalition forces faced growing criticism from within the Iraqi Governing Council, where Adnan Bakachi said, "These operations by the Americans are unacceptable and illegal." Al Jazeera reporter Ahmed Mansour, and cameraman Laith Mushtaq, the only two non-embedded journalists covering the conflict since April 3, 2004, reported that an unknown source stated that the United States insisted that the reporters be withdrawn from the city, as a precondition to the ceasefire. At noon on April 9, 2004, under pressure from the Governing Council, Paul Bremer announced that the U.S. forces would be unilaterally holding a ceasefire, stating that they wanted to facilitate negotiations between the Iraqi Governing Council, insurgents and city spokespersons, and to allow government supplies to be delivered to residents. As a consequence, much-needed humanitarian relief which had been held up by the fighting and blockade finally managed to enter the city, notably a major convoy organized by private citizens, businessmen and clerics from Baghdad as a joint Shia-Sunni effort. Some U.S. forces used this time to occupy and scavenge abandoned houses and convert them into de facto bunkers, while a number of insurgents did the same. At this point, it was estimated that 600 Iraqis had been killed, at least half of whom were non-combatants. Although hundreds of insurgents had been killed in the assault, the city remained firmly in their control. American forces had by then only managed to gain a foothold in the industrial district to the south of the city. The end of major operations for the time being led to negotiations between various Iraqi elements and the coalition forces, punctuated by occasional firefights. On April 13, 2004, U.S. Marines fell under attack from insurgents located within a mosque. An airstrike destroyed the mosque, prompting a public outcry. On April 15, 2004, an American F-16 Fighting Falcon dropped a 2,000-pound JDAM GPS-guided bomb over the northern district of Fallujah. On April 19, 2004, the ceasefire seemed to be consolidated with a plan to reintroduce joint U.S.-Iraqi patrols in the city. Over time this arrangement broke down and the city remained a major center of opposition to the U.S.-appointed Iraqi interim government. Additionally, the composition of the armed groups in Fallujah changed during the following months, shifting from domination by secular, nationalist and ex-Ba'athist groups towards a marked influence of warlords with ties to organized crime and groups following a radical Wahhabi stance. On April 27, 2004, insurgents attacked U.S. defensive positions, forcing the Americans to call on air support. In response, on April 28, 2004, the aircraft carrier George Washington launched squadrons VFA-136, VFA-131, VF-11, and VF-143 to fly combat air sorties against insurgents in Fallujah. During this operation, aircraft from Carrier Air Wing 7 dropped 13 GBU-12 Paveway-2 laser-guided bombs on insurgent positions and also provided combat air support to the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. U.S. withdrawal. On May 1, 2004, the United States withdrew from Fallujah, as Lieutenant General James Conway announced that he had unilaterally decided to turn over any remaining operations to the newly formed Fallujah Brigade, which would be armed with U.S. weapons and equipment under the command of former Ba'athist Army General Jassim Mohammed Saleh. Several days later, when it became clear that Saleh had been involved in military actions against Shiites under Saddam Hussein, U.S. forces announced that Mohammed Latif would instead lead the brigade. Nevertheless, the group dissolved and had turned over all the U.S. weapons to the insurgency by September, prompting the Second Battle of Fallujah in November, which successfully occupied the city. During the interim period between the two battles, U.S. forces maintained a presence at Camp Bahariya, a few miles outside the city limits. Legacy. The largest combat mission since the declaration of the end of major hostilities, the First Battle of Fallujah marked a turning point in public perception of the ongoing conflict. This was because insurgents, rather than Saddam loyalists, were seen as the chief opponents of U.S. forces. It was also judged by both military and civilian agencies that reliance upon U.S.-funded regional militias, such as the failed Fallujah Brigade, could prove disastrous. American strategists were mercurial about the outcome of the battle, with one writing, "The handwriting is on the wall." The Battle of Fallujah was not a defeat, but we cannot afford many more victories like it. The battle also pushed Abu Musab al-Zarqawi into the public spotlight as the best-known commander of anti-coalition forces in Iraq, and brought public attention to the concept of a Sunni triangle. 27 U.S. servicemen were killed during the battle in Fallujah. A total of 800 Iraqis died in the battle as well, of which 572 616 were civilians and 184 228 insurgents. Many of the Iraqis killed were buried inside the city's former football stadium, which became known as the Martyrs' Cemetery. Participating units: 1st Marine Division, 1st Battalion 5th Marines, 1st Battalion 3rd Marines, 2nd Battalion 1st Marines, 2nd Battalion 2nd Marines, 3rd Battalion 4th Marines, 2nd Battalion 7th Marines, 3rd Battalion 24th Marines, 1st Tank Battalion, 1st Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion, 2nd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion, 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, 1st Combat Engineer Battalion, 2nd Combat Engineer Battalion, Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 74, 3rd Assault Amphibian Battalion, 21st Military Police Company, 1st Force Service Support Group, Combat Service Support Company 113, 1st Infantry Division, 1st Battalion, 16th Infantry, 5th Special Forces Group, 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, Department of Defense Security Forces, Tactical Response Team, 101st Airborne Division, 82nd Airborne Division, 10th Mountain Division, 1st Battalion 32nd Infantry, HM 161, HMLA 775, HMLA 167, VFA 131, HM 764, Combat Service Support Battalion 1, 505th Iraqi Civil Defense Corps, 30th Iraqi Commando Battalion, Iraqi Special Operations Brigade, Iraqi National Counter-Terrorism Force. In popular culture, No True Glory, a frontline account of the Battle for Fallujah, by Bing West, No True Glory, The Battle for Fallujah, an upcoming film based on Bing West's book starring Harrison Ford. Blood Stripes, The Grunt's View of the War in Iraq, by David J. Danilo, Boredom by Day, Death by Night, an Iraq War Journal, by Marine Sergeant Seth Connor, Once a Marine, an Iraq War Tank Commander's inspirational memoir of combat, courage, and recovery, by Nicholas Popadich, with Mike Steer, Fallujah Forensics, a documentary film by Tara Sutton, Beyond the Green Zone, Dispatches from an Unembedded Journalist in Occupied Iraq, by Dud Jamil Haymarket Books. See also: Second Battle of Fallujah, United States occupation of Fallujah, 2004 in Iraq, History of Iraqi insurgency, Iraqi insurgency. References: Operation Vigilant Resolve at Global Security, Iraq, The Siege of Fallujah, Guardian Unlimited. Detailed interactive on the Fallujah battles. External resources: U.S. launches Vigilant Resolve, Associated Press, April 5, 2004. News article published at the start of the operation. Hardball with Chris Matthews, April 7, 2004. MSNBC transcript of a television report providing information on Operation Vigilant Resolve and the rest of the spring uprisings. Private Warriors, PBS Frontline.